I was standing in my garage organizing tools on a Saturday morning when I heard the screech of tires followed by a car door slamming. Before I could even turn around, Patricia Hendricks from the HOA was marching up my driveway with her phone held out like a weapon, her face twisted into that expression I had come to know too well over the past 6 months. "I have had it with you people," she announced, her voice shrill enough to make my neighbor's dog start barking 3 houses down. "I have called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they are on their way right now to deal with your wife. I know she's illegal. I've known it since the day you two moved into this neighborhood." I set down the wrench I had been holding and took a slow breath, trying to process what I had just heard. My wife Maria was inside preparing for her shift later that evening, probably completely unaware that our HOA president had just potentially committed a federal crime on our front lawn. "Patricia, I really think you need to calm down and think about what you just did," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger rising in my chest. "Don't you tell me to calm down, Frank Morrison. I have been documenting everything, the way she speaks with an accent, the strange hours she keeps, the fact that she drives a car with government plates but won't tell anyone where she works. It's suspicious, and I'm doing my civic duty by reporting it." Patricia was in her early 50s, with bleached blonde hair that she kept in the same style I imagined she had worn since 1995. She wore a velour tracksuit despite the Texas heat, and she carried a binder everywhere she went that contained every HOA violation she had ever documented in our subdivision of Meadowbrook Heights in San Antonio. She had been HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she had made life miserable for at least a dozen families. "You know what, Patricia? I'm not even going to argue with you. Why don't you wait right here, and I'll go get Maria. I think she'll want to hear about this directly." Patricia crossed her arms and planted herself at the end of my driveway like she was guarding a border checkpoint. "Fine, I'll wait. And when ICE gets here, we'll see who's right." I walked into the house through the garage door and found Maria in our bedroom, dressed in her civilian clothes but with her military uniform laid out on the bed. She was lacing up her boots when I came in. "Hey, babe, we have a situation," I said. Maria looked up at me with those sharp brown eyes that never missed a detail. She had been in military intelligence for 12 years, and she had a way of reading people in situations that sometimes unnerved even me. "What kind of situation?" "Patricia from the HOA just called ICE on you. She's waiting in our driveway right now, very proud of herself." Maria's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. "She did what?" "Called immigration. She thinks you're here illegally because of your accent and because you won't tell the neighbors where you work." My wife stood up slowly, and I recognized the shift in her demeanor. This was the woman who had interrogated enemy combatants, who had coordinated intelligence operations across 3 continents, who had a security clearance so high that even I didn't know the full extent of what she did. "All right then, let's go have a conversation with Patricia." We walked out together through the front door this time. Patricia was still standing in the driveway, now joined by 2 other HOA board members, Susan Crawford and Janet Miller, who must have been summoned for backup. All 3 women stood there like a tribunal, clipboards and phones at the ready. "Maria," Patricia said with false sweetness, "so nice of you to join us. I was just explaining to your husband that I've contacted the proper authorities about your immigration status." Maria walked down our front steps with perfect posture, her movements controlled and precise. "Is that so? And what exactly did you tell them, Patricia?" "I told them that we have a suspected illegal immigrant living in our neighborhood and that she needs to be investigated and likely deported. This is a respectable community and we have standards." "Standards," Maria repeated. "I see. And you're certain I'm here illegally because?" Susan jumped in, clearly emboldened by Patricia's confidence. "Because you won't tell anyone what you do for work. You're very secretive, and you have an accent. Plus, you keep weird hours and sometimes you're gone for weeks at a time. It's obvious something isn't right." I watched Maria's face and saw the tiniest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. This was not going to end well for Patricia. "You're absolutely right that I keep unusual hours and that I'm sometimes gone for extended periods," Maria said calmly. "Would you like to know why?" "I think we already know why," Patricia said smugly. "You're probably working under the table somewhere, taking jobs from real Americans." Maria pulled out her phone and made a call. Yes, this is Captain Maria Patel. I need you to send someone to my home address immediately. Yes, the one on file. We have a situation that requires official documentation. Thank you. Patricia's confidence faltered slightly. Captain? Captain Maria Patel, United States Army Military Intelligence Corps, Maria said clearly. I work at Fort Sam Houston in the Intelligence Division. The reason I keep unusual hours is because intelligence operations don't run on a 9-to-5 schedule. The reason I'm sometimes gone for weeks is because I deploy on classified assignments. And the reason I have an accent is because I was born in Mumbai, India. Immigrated legally to the United States with my family when I was 8 years old, became a naturalized citizen at 18, and joined the Army immediately after completing my degree in international relations from Georgetown University. The color drained from Patricia's face, but she tried to maintain her composure. Well, how are we supposed to know that? You should have told the HOA board about your occupation. I'm under no obligation to disclose my employment to the HOA board, Maria replied. And frankly, Patricia, what you've done today is likely a federal offense. Filing a false report with ICE is a crime. Harassment of a military service member can be prosecuted under both civilian and military law. And if the report you filed was motivated by discrimination based on my national origin, that opens up a whole other set of legal issues. Janet, who had been silent until now, took a step back. I didn't know about any of this. I just came over because Susan called and said there was an HOA meeting. This isn't an official HOA meeting, I pointed out. This is Patricia harassing my wife and committing what I'm pretty sure is a hate crime. A black sedan pulled up to our curb, and a man in military dress uniform stepped out. He walked directly to Maria and saluted. Captain Patel, Major Williams reporting as requested. Maria returned the salute. Thank you for coming on short notice, Major. These are members of my HOA board. The woman in the middle, Patricia Hendricks, filed a false report with ICE claiming I'm an illegal immigrant. I wanted official documentation of my service record and citizenship status for the inevitable legal proceedings. Major Williams turned to look at Patricia with the kind of stare that made seasoned soldiers nervous. Madam, are you aware that Captain Patel has been awarded 2 Bronze Stars for her service in Afghanistan and Iraq? That she currently holds a top-secret security clearance and works on operations critical to national security? That filing false reports about military personnel is taken very seriously by both civilian and military authorities? Patricia had gone from pale to red, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Susan and Janet had already started backing away toward their own houses. I didn't know, Patricia stammered. She never said anything. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to call ICE on your neighbors in the first place, I said, my patience finally wearing thin. You could have just minded your own business like a normal person. A second vehicle arrived, this one marked as ICE. 2 agents stepped out, looking confused as they took in the scene of military personnel standing in a suburban driveway. We received a report about this address, one of the agents said, checking his tablet. Maria stepped forward. That would be the false report filed by this woman here. I'm Captain Maria Patel, United States Army. I'm a naturalized citizen, and I have all documentation to prove it. The person who filed this report did so maliciously and without any factual basis. The ICE agent looked at Patricia with obvious annoyance. Madam, did you file this report? Yes, but I thought, did you have any actual evidence of illegal immigration? Or did you just assume based on this woman's appearance and accent? Patricia didn't answer, which was answer enough. The agent shook his head. Madam, filing false reports wastes federal resources and is subject to prosecution. We take this very seriously. I'm going to need your information for our records. While the ICE agent was taking down Patricia's information, more neighbors started coming out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. I saw old Mr. Chen from 2 doors down, the Rodriguez family from across the street, and the Johnsons from next door, all emerging to see what was happening. Maria stood calmly through all of it, answering questions from the ICE agents, providing her military ID and citizenship documentation, and maintaining perfect professional composure. I was proud of her, but I was also furious at Patricia for putting her through this. After about 30 minutes, the ICE agents left, but not before telling Patricia that they would be forwarding her information to their investigative unit for potential prosecution for filing a false report. Major Williams stayed a bit longer, talking quietly with Maria about the incident and making sure she didn't need anything else from the base. Once the officials had left, several of our neighbors came over to apologize and express their support. Mr. Chen, a retired engineer who had immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago, was particularly upset. "Patricia has been a problem for years," he said to Maria. "She tried to get my daughter's family kicked out last year because they had too many cars in the driveway. Said they were running a business out of their house. They weren't. They just had family visiting." Rosa Rodriguez, a nurse who worked at the same hospital where Maria sometimes did medical training exercises, hugged Maria tightly. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with this. Patricia tried to fine us $300 last month because our grass was half an inch too tall according to her measurements. She walks around this neighborhood like she owns it." Patricia, Susan, and Janet had retreated to Patricia's house across the street, but I could see them watching from the windows. The incident wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, after Maria had left for her shift at the base, I sat down and started documenting everything that had happened. I wrote down times, direct quotes as best as I could remember them, and the names of everyone who had witnessed the incident. I had a feeling we were going to need it. The next morning, Sunday, I was woken up at 7 in the morning by someone pounding on my front door. I stumbled downstairs in my pajamas to find Patricia standing there with another one of her clipboards. "Your trash cans are still on the curb," she announced. "HOA rules state that all trash receptacles must be returned to their storage location within 12 hours of collection. Your collection was Friday morning. It's now Sunday. That's a $50 fine." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're seriously trying to fine me after what you did yesterday?" "HOA rules apply to everyone equally," Patricia said primly. "Just because your wife threw around her military rank doesn't mean you get special treatment." "Patricia, I'm going to give you some free advice. Back off. What you did yesterday was illegal. If you continue to harass us, it's only going to make things worse for you." "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm enforcing the rules that every homeowner agreed to when they purchased property in Meadowbrook Heights. If you don't like it, you can move." She thrust a violation notice into my hand and walked away. I looked down at the paper, perfectly formatted with the HOA letterhead, citing Code Section 7.3.4 regarding trash receptacle placement. It was dated and time-stamped. Patricia might have been a nightmare, but she was an organized nightmare. I took a photo of the violation notice and texted it to Maria. Her response came back 5 minutes later. "Let her play her games. We're documenting everything." Over the next week, things escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Patricia seemed determined to prove that she was still in charge of the neighborhood, and we became her primary target. On Monday, I received a violation notice for having a wreath on our front door that was non-regulation size. On Tuesday, it was because our house numbers weren't the exact shade of brass specified in the HOA guidelines. On Wednesday, she claimed our lawn furniture was the wrong style. Each violation came with a $50 or $100 fine, all documented with photos, timestamps, and citations to specific HOA bylaws. I started to understand how Patricia had maintained her reign of terror over the neighborhood. She was relentless, petty, and knew the rules better than anyone. But Patricia made a crucial mistake. She got so obsessed with harassing us that she stopped paying attention to what else was happening in the neighborhood. Maria had been busy. On her days off, she'd been going door to door, talking to every resident of Meadowbrook Heights. She had a legal pad where she documented every complaint, every unfair fine, every incident of harassment that Patricia had inflicted on our neighbors over the past 3 years. The list was extensive. The Chens had been fined over $2,000 for various violations, including having their grandchildren's toys visible in the front yard and planting the wrong type of flowers in their flower beds. The Rodriguez family had been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid HOA fines that they disputed but couldn't afford to fight legally. The Johnsons had been cited for parking their work van in their own driveway overnight. A single mother named Karren Thompson, yes, ironically also named Karren, Living 4 houses down, had been harassed relentlessly because her son had special needs and sometimes made noise that Patricia deemed excessive. The more Maria dug, the more dirt she uncovered. Patricia had been using her position as HOA president to make herself and her friends exempt from certain rules while strictly enforcing them against people she didn't like. She had hired her brother-in-law's company for landscaping work at inflated prices, likely getting kickbacks. She had manipulated HOA elections by not properly notifying all residents of meeting times and voting procedures. Maria compiled all of this information into a detailed report, complete with witness statements, financial records that several neighbors had kept, and copies of violation notices. Then, she did what she did best. She analyzed the data and found the patterns. "Frank, look at this," she said one evening, spreading papers across our dining room table. "Patricia has issued over 300 violation notices in the past 3 years. But look at the demographics of who received them. 70% went to families with non-European surnames, 85% went to households where English wasn't the primary language, and 100% of the threats of foreclosure went to immigrant families." I looked at the data she had organized into color-coded charts and graphs. "This is a pattern of discrimination. This is evidence of systematic harassment and discrimination," Maria corrected. "And with the ICE incident, we now have documentation of her specifically targeting people based on national origin. This isn't just an annoying HOA president, this is potentially criminal civil rights violations." Maria made several phone calls over the next few days. She contacted a civil rights attorney she knew through her military connections. She reached out to the Texas Attorney General's office. She filed formal complaints with the county and city housing authorities, and she organized the neighbors. 2 weeks after Patricia had called ICE, we held a meeting at our house. 37 families showed up, representing about 60% of the homes in Meadowbrook Heights. Our living room and backyard were packed with angry, frustrated neighbors who had been dealing with Patricia's abuse for years. Maria stood up front, every inch the military officer, and presented her findings. She showed the data on discriminatory enforcement. She presented the financial irregularities in HOA spending. She outlined the violations of Texas HOA law that Patricia had committed, including failing to properly notify residents of meetings, not maintaining proper financial records, and using HOA funds inappropriately. The question now is what we want to do about it, Maria said. "We have enough documentation to file criminal complaints, civil lawsuits, and to remove Patricia from the HOA board. But it will require everyone here to be willing to stand up and testify to what they've experienced." Mr. Chen stood up first. "I'm in. I'm 80 years old and I'm tired of being afraid in my own neighborhood." Rosa Rodriguez stood next. "My family, too. We've been scared of losing our home over these ridiculous fines. No more." One by one, families stood up and committed to taking action. The single mother, Karren Thompson, was in tears as she described how Patricia had threatened to call CPS on her because her son with autism had meltdowns in the backyard. A young couple, the Andersons, talked about how Patricia had tried to block them from moving in because they were an interracial couple. By the end of the meeting, we had 37 families committed to taking legal action against Patricia and the HOA board. Maria had already contacted the attorney, who agreed to take the case partially pro bono given the clear evidence of civil rights violations. The next day, we called for an emergency HOA meeting, as was our right under the bylaws. We properly noticed every resident, posted the announcement in all required locations, and sent certified letters to each board member. Patricia couldn't ignore it or claim she didn't know about it. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday in the community center that the HOA technically owned but rarely let anyone use. When Maria and I arrived at 6 in the evening, the parking lot was already packed. We had expected good turnout, but this was beyond what I had imagined. There must have been over 100 people there, including residents from the neighboring subdivisions who had heard about what was happening. Inside, Patricia sat at the front table with Susan and Janet, looking nervous. She had clearly expected to control this meeting like she controlled everything else, but the crowd facing her was hostile. Maria called the meeting to order. As a resident and homeowner, she had the right to do so when the board president failed to maintain proper order. Patricia started to object, but the crowd shouted her down. "We are here tonight to address systematic abuse, financial mismanagement, and criminal discrimination by the current HOA board," Maria announced, her voice clear and commanding. "I have here a petition signed by 72 homeowners calling for the immediate removal of Patricia Hendricks as HOA president and the dissolution of the current board." She held up the petition, which we had been circulating all week. Under Texas law, a sufficient number of homeowners could force a recall election of the HOA board. Patricia's face turned purple. "This is a coup. You can't just remove me because you don't like that I enforce the rules." "This isn't about enforcing rules," Mr. Chen said, standing up from the crowd. "This is about you being a bully and a racist." The crowd erupted in agreement. People started shouting their own stories of harassment, and Patricia visibly shrank in her chair. Maria held up her hand for quiet. "Let's do this properly. I'm going to present the evidence we've compiled, and then we'll vote on whether to remove the current board and install an interim board until proper elections can be held." For the next hour, Maria methodically presented the case against Patricia. She showed financial records proving that Patricia's brother-in-law's company had been paid 3 times the market rate for landscaping services. She presented the data showing discriminatory enforcement of HOA rules. She had witnesses testify about harassment and threats. And she played the recording that I had made on my phone during the ICE incident, which I had forgotten about until Maria asked if I had captured any of it. Hearing Patricia's voice on the recording saying, "I have called Immigration and Customs Enforcement," and later, "We'll see who's right when ICE gets here," was damning. The crowd was silent as they listened to the entire exchange, including Maria calmly explaining her military service and the ICE agent telling Patricia she could face prosecution. When the recording ended, Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Susan and Janet had both moved their chairs away from her slightly, physically distancing themselves. "Before we vote," the civil rights attorney Maria had brought, a sharp woman named Lisa Brennan, stood up to speak. "I want everyone here to understand the severity of what has been happening in this community. What Patricia Hendricks did in calling ICE on Captain Patel was not just mean or petty, it was a federal crime. Filing a false report with a federal agency is illegal. Additionally, the pattern of discrimination we've documented represents violations of the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination in housing based on national origin, race, and other protected characteristics. My firm will be filing a civil lawsuit on behalf of the affected residents, and we will be referring the criminal matters to the appropriate authorities." Patricia finally found her voice. "You can't do this to me. I've given 3 years of my life to this neighborhood. I've kept property values up. I've maintained standards." "You've terrorized people," Rosa Rodriguez said, standing up. "You threatened my family with foreclosure because our grass was too long. We have 3 kids and we both work full-time. Sometimes the grass doesn't get mowed exactly on schedule. That's life. That's not a reason to try to take away our home." The vote was called. Out of the 86 voting members present, 83 voted to remove Patricia as HOA president and to dissolve the current board. Only Susan and Janet voted against it, and Patricia herself abstained, probably on advice from a lawyer she had frantically called during the break. An interim board was elected immediately, with Mr. Chen as president, Rosa Rodriguez as vice president, and 3 other longtime residents filling the remaining positions. Their first act was to vote to suspend all pending fines and to conduct a comprehensive review of all fines issued in the past 3 years. Their second act was to vote to fully cooperate with any law enforcement or civil investigations into the previous board's conduct. Patricia stormed out of the meeting with Susan and Janet trailing behind her. As she left, she shouted, "You haven't heard the last of this. I'll sue every single one of you." But her threats were empty, and everyone knew it. The legal process moved forward over the following months. The civil rights lawsuit was filed, naming Patricia personally, as well as the HOA board. The discovery process revealed even more financial irregularities, including that Patricia had been paying herself a salary from HOA funds without authorization from the residents. She had embezzled nearly $40,000 over 3 years. The criminal investigation led to charges being filed. The district attorney's office prosecuted Patricia for filing a false report with federal authorities for embezzlement and for conspiracy to defraud the HOA members. Susan and Janet cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for immunity, providing testimony about how Patricia had manipulated financial records and directed them to target specific families. I attended every court hearing with Maria, watching as Patricia's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. Her attorney tried to argue that she had made an honest mistake about Maria's immigration status, but the recording of the incident made it clear that Patricia had acted with malicious intent. He tried to argue that the financial irregularities were just poor bookkeeping, but the prosecution showed systematic and intentional embezzlement. During one particularly memorable hearing, the prosecutor called Maria to testify. She took the stand in her dress uniform, medals displayed. The prosecutor asked her to describe her service record. I've served in the United States Army for 12 years, Maria testified. I've completed 3 tours in combat zones, working in military intelligence. I've been awarded 2 Bronze Stars, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the Army Commendation Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. I currently hold the rank of captain and work in intelligence operations at Fort Sam Houston. And on the day in question, what did the defendant say to you? She told me she had called ICE to have me investigated and deported because she believed I was an illegal immigrant. She cited my accent and my refusal to disclose my employment details to the HOA as evidence of illegal status. Did you ever give her reason to believe you were in the country illegally? No. I've been a United States citizen for 20 years. I've served my country honorably in the military. I had no obligation to share my citizenship status or military service with my HOA president. The prosecutor pulled up a screen showing the data Maria had compiled about violation notices. Captain Patel, can you explain what this chart represents? Maria walked through the discriminatory pattern of enforcement, explaining how she had analyzed 3 years of data and found clear statistical evidence of targeting based on national origin and race. She spoke like the intelligence analyst she was, presenting facts calmly and methodically. It was devastating to Patricia's case. The defense attorney tried to cross-examine Maria, but he quickly found himself out of his depth. When he suggested that maybe Maria was just overly sensitive to normal HOA enforcement, Maria calmly pulled out additional documentation showing white families with similar or worse violations who had never received citations. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, filing a false report with federal authorities, embezzlement, fraud, and criminal harassment. The civil rights violations were being handled separately in federal court, but the state charges were enough to result in serious consequences. At sentencing, the judge did not hold back. Ms. Hendricks, you abused a position of trust in your community. You targeted vulnerable families, many of them immigrants who were trying to build better lives for themselves. You stole money from your neighbors. And when confronted with someone you couldn't bully, you attempted to weaponize federal law enforcement against them. This court takes such conduct very seriously. Patricia was sentenced to 3 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA for the embezzled funds, plus damages. The civil lawsuit was still pending, but with a criminal conviction, it was likely to result in substantial additional penalties. As Maria and I walked out of the courthouse that day, we were met by a crowd of our neighbors who had come to witness the sentencing. Mr. Chen hugged Maria tightly, tears in his eyes. Rosa Rodriguez brought her whole family, including her kids, who had made a banner that said, "Thank you, Captain Maria." "This isn't just about me," Maria said to the crowd. "This is about all of us standing up to bullies and discrimination. This is about making our neighborhood a place where everyone is welcome and treated fairly." The local news covered the story, and it became a cautionary tale about HOA abuse and the importance of holding community leaders accountable. Maria gave several interviews, always in her military uniform, speaking about both her service and about the rights of all residents, regardless of their background. The HOA, under new leadership, became a completely different organization. Mr. Chen and the new board immediately suspended all discriminatory rules and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood barbecues, started a community garden, and established a fund to help families who were struggling with past fines that had been unjustly imposed. The old violation against me for my trash cans being out too long? Dismissed. The fine for our door wreath? Dismissed. Every single citation that Patricia had issued was reviewed, and the vast majority were found to be either invalid or disproportionate. The new board issued refunds where possible and established payment plans for legitimate fees that families owed. 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, Maria received orders for a new assignment. She was being promoted to major and transferred to a position at the Pentagon. It was a huge opportunity, and I was incredibly proud of her, but it meant we would be leaving San Antonio. We put our house on the market, and it sold within a week. The buyers were a young military family, and when they learned about what had happened with Patricia, they were actually more excited to move in. "That's exactly the kind of neighborhood we want to be part of," the husband, also an Army officer, told us, "a community that stands up for what's right." At our going-away party, which the entire neighborhood turned out for, Mr. Chen gave a speech that made Maria cry, which was something I had only seen her do twice in all the years I had known her. "Captain Patel came to our neighborhood and she was targeted by a bully," Mr. Chen said. "But instead of just defending herself, she defended all of us. She saw what Patricia was doing to this entire community, and she used her skills and her determination to make it right. She didn't have to do that. She could have just dealt with her own situation and moved on. But that's not who she is. She's a soldier, and she fights for people who need protecting. We are all better because she lived here, and we will never forget what she did for us." The crowd erupted in applause. Maria stood up, wiping her eyes, and hugged Mr. Chen. Then she turned to address everyone. "When I came to this country as a little girl, my parents told me that America was a place where everyone could build a better life if they worked hard and followed the rules," Maria said. "They taught me to love this country, to serve it, to defend it. When I joined the Army, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't end when I came home from deployment. It applies here, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. What Patricia did was un-American. It was the kind of discrimination and abuse of power that we fight against around the world. I couldn't let it stand here at home. Thank you all for standing with me, for trusting me, and for making this community what it should be, a place where everyone belongs." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Even I had to wipe away tears, and I'm not usually an emotional guy. We moved to Northern Virginia a few weeks later. The transition was smooth, and Maria threw herself into her new role at the Pentagon. I found work as an engineer at a defense contractor, and we bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with a much more reasonable HOA. But we stayed in touch with our friends from San Antonio. Mr. Chen emailed regularly with updates about the neighborhood. The Rodriguez family sent us Christmas cards with pictures of their kids. Even the attorney, Lisa Brennan, became a friend, keeping us updated on the ongoing civil litigation against Patricia. The civil case was eventually settled. Patricia was ordered to pay damages to 23 families who had been specifically targeted by her discriminatory enforcement. The total came to over $200,000, which Patricia would likely be paying off for the rest of her life. The HOA's insurance covered some of it, but Patricia was personally liable for the majority. A year after we moved, Maria and I flew back to San Antonio for a special ceremony. The neighborhood was dedicating a new community center that had been built with funds from the settlement and from a successful fundraising campaign. They wanted Maria to be there for the ribbon cutting. The community center was beautiful, with spaces for meetings, a playground for kids, and a community room that could be used for events. On the wall near the entrance, there was a plaque that read, "Meadowbrook Heights Community Center," dedicated to the principle that all residents deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of where they come from or what language they speak. Established 2025. Below that, in smaller letters, "In honor of Captain Maria Patel, whose courage and leadership reminded us that we are strongest when we stand together." Maria stood in front of that plaque for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, she turned to me with a smile. "You know, when Patricia called ICE that day, I was so angry. I kept thinking about all the families who don't have the resources or the power to fight back against that kind of bullying. People who are vulnerable, who are afraid, who don't know their rights. I'm glad we could help change things. You change things, I corrected her. I just stood there and tried not to punch Patricia in the face. She laughed. Your restraint was noted and appreciated. We spent the weekend in San Antonio, visiting with all our old neighbors, eating too much barbecue, and feeling grateful for the community we had been part of. On Sunday morning, before we flew back to Virginia, we drove past our old house. The new family had painted the front door a cheerful yellow and had added flower boxes under the windows. It looked happy. As we drove away, I thought about everything that had happened. What had started as a simple case of an HOA president harassing her neighbors had turned into a federal case, criminal prosecutions, and ultimately, real change in a community. All because Patricia Hendricks had made the mistake of targeting someone who refused to be intimidated and who had the skills and determination to fight back. Maria reached over and squeezed my hand. No regrets? She asked. None, I said. Well, except maybe I wish I had gotten to see Patricia's face when she realized she had called ICE on an Army intelligence officer. That must have been priceless. Oh, I'll never forget it, Maria said with a grin. The exact moment when she understood how badly she had messed up. That was better than any medal. We flew back to Virginia that afternoon, back to our new life and new challenges. But we carried with us the knowledge that sometimes standing up to bullies and fighting for what's right can actually make a difference. It's not always easy and it's not always quick, but it matters. Patricia Hendricks served 18 months in prison before being released on parole. She moved to a different city, her reputation destroyed and her finances in ruins. The families she had terrorized were finally free from her harassment, and the neighborhood thrived under new leadership. And Maria continued to serve her country, both in uniform and as an example of what it means to be an American, to stand up for others, and to refuse to let bullies and bigots win. She received a commendation from her commanding general for her actions in the HOA case, which had apparently been noticed at high levels of the military as an example of exemplary conduct by a service member in their civilian life. Years later, when people ask me about the craziest thing that ever happened to me, I tell them about the time an HOA Karren called immigration on my wife and didn't know she was a military intelligence officer. It always gets a reaction. But the real story isn't about revenge or even justice, though both of those happened. The real story is about a community coming together, about people refusing to be intimidated, and about how one person with courage and skill can inspire others to stand up for themselves. Maria made major, then lieutenant colonel, and eventually full colonel. She retired after 25 years of service, having served in some of the most sensitive and important intelligence operations of her generation. But when they wrote up her official service record, the incident with Patricia and the HOA got a mention, along with all her combat deployments and classified operations. Because defending the rights and dignity of American citizens, including immigrants who had come here for a better life, was just as much a part of her service as anything she did in uniform overseas. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson from the whole experience. Never underestimate your spouse. Always document everything when dealing with a difficult HOA. And for the love of God, if your neighbor has an accent and keeps weird hours, maybe just assume they have an interesting job rather than jumping to the conclusion that they're an illegal immigrant. It'll save everyone a lot of trouble. The Meadowbrook Heights neighborhood continued to thrive, becoming known as one of the most welcoming and diverse communities in San Antonio. Property values actually increased under the new HOA leadership, proving that you don't need a tyrant to maintain standards. You just need decent people who care about their neighbors and treat everyone with respect. And somewhere, maybe in a small apartment in some other city, Patricia Hendricks probably still thinks she was right, that she was just enforcing the rules, that she was the victim of some conspiracy. But the 83 people who voted to remove her, the 23 families who sued her, the jury that convicted her, and the judge who sentenced her, all disagreed. Sometimes the law works the way it's supposed to, and bullies face consequences for their actions. That's the story of how an HOA Karren called immigration on my wife, and learned the hard way that Maria wasn't just a military intelligence officer, but was also someone who had dedicated her life to defending the Constitution and the rights it guarantees to everyone, citizen or immigrant, military or civilian. Patricia wanted to use fear and intimidation to control people. Maria used courage, intelligence, and the law to protect them. In the end, it wasn't even a fair fight, wasn't.